So if you look at the player's handbook, right, most of what's in this book is about how to fight things and how to kill things. The majority of this book is classes that vary in how they are able to kill things. There is an entire section on how to kill things, and then there is an entire section on how to use magic to help you kill things. And even when you're not in combat, most of what's in this book revolves around you going on some sort of quest in order to kill a thing. See, killing things is definitely the main aspect of most, if not almost all, D&D games. That being said, it is entirely reasonable that most D&D games are going to revolve around the players eventually getting into a room alone with some sort of villain and then fighting to the death. And it really doesn't need to be much more complicated than that. That's totally fine. But along the way, you're probably going to have a lot of other smaller combat encounters and some stepping stones to get to those really big moments. And in these ones, sometimes just getting in a room and fighting to the death can get a little stale. Not only can that get a little repetitive and boring over a long-term campaign, I also think that if you're playing with players that are a little experienced, they get a general sense of when and when not they're gonna actually be in a lot of danger. So, see, here's what you're actually setting up when you just have a combat encounter that is based entirely around the players and the enemies fighting to the death. You are setting up that the goal of the players is to kill this thing, and the consequence of not killing this thing is that they're gonna die. And a lot of times, that high of a consequence is not exactly what you want for that combat encounter. You know, I know that the randomness of the dice and anything can happen in the moment is a big part of D&D, but any dungeon master knows that when you're trying to tell a narrative and share in a storytelling experience with your friends, there are moments where you don't want them to just die. You know, there are moments where that shouldn't actually be the consequence of the combat encounter. But when you set up combat as just this sort of fight to the death between two opposing forces all the time, 100% of the time, that is always the precedent, that someone here is going to die. And oftentimes, if not almost all the time, that's not going to be the players. So that consequence, although it seems really high, can get a little dull. So I think a really good way to mix up combat and keep it interesting is to try to find ways to have consequences and objectives that aren't inherently linked to murdering or getting murdered. So this video is just going to be a list of 5 types of encounters, 5 just sort of general things you can throw into combat or other dangerous situations in your D&D game, where the consequence and or the objective of what your players are trying to do isn't going to be death-centric. And just as a footnote before I start the list, I also do think it is important that every once in a while, when you do have these fight-to-the-death encounters, because you do need to have them, I mean, it's really a big part of the game, you still need to be doing some things to keep it interesting. Terrain, adding some Hoard monsters, some items that they can get throughout the encounter, maybe stages to the boss fight, you know, just a lot of stuff. But that is for different videos that are already on YouTube that you can watch from a bunch of people that are more established and smarter than I am. So if you want to know about that, just look up how to fix your combat or improve your combat or whatever other somewhat diminutive phrase they used for their clickbait title. Okay. First on my little list here is Escorts. Now, Escorts have a bit of a bad rap, obviously. I think the video game Resident Evil 4 set a really bad precedent for having Escorts, but it seems like a lot of recent games, you know, God of War, or to some extent Red Dead with all your campmates that help you out with fights, seems that they're sort of fixing that precedent, which is good, because I really like Escorts, and I think they're something that can really help out D&D if you do them right. And what I mean by doing escort right is that I mean they need to be able to hold their own. That doesn't necessarily mean fighting. In fact, a lot of times your escorts that the party takes with them aren't going to be good at fighting. But it means whatever it is that they're there to do, they need to be able to do that pretty well without there being a really constant, annoying threat of them dying or getting captured along the way. Because that's just another hassle to deal with. And the reason I think that gets a lot of boring to players and annoying is not because it is just repetitive and tedious, but because every time that happens, the plot that we are focusing on is taking a halt. Because we know what we need to do. We know that we need to get the escort to location X so they can do what they need to do to help move our objective and our story along. And every time the party gets hindered by them getting captured or knocked out or whatever, their objective isn't changing, they're just being delayed. It's kind of like an unnecessary chase sequence in an action movie that doesn't progress the plot and it's kind of just in the character's way. It gets a lot less exciting the second or third time that happens because our concept of what the story isn't evolving and changing in an interesting way, it is staying stagnant. That being said, I think there's a lot of inherent interest in having a combat or non-combat focused NPC in the party that the players take along in order to forward their story. And this character might have their own agendas and their own things they need to do, but at the end of the day, the reason that that escort is there is because the players have determined that taking them to this place will help them. That is another important thing. If the escort is dumped on them, that will almost always be annoying. If the players have to take someone somewhere and they can't really do shit, then it's just going to be annoying and it's going to be a hassle for them. But if they decide this person has information that we need, or this person will help us if we take them to this place, then they're probably going to be a lot more willing to kind of lift that person's weight and be tolerant of them. So you can see here now, the consequence of the encounters will no longer be death. If you have an escort in the group and a group of monsters attacks, the consequence is not that the players are going to die, the consequence is that the escort is going to get hurt in some way. So I think that's just an interesting way to change up the consequences of the encounter. Examples here could be maybe they have a researcher or a historian or an herbalist or something with them, and they know that there's a particular type of ingredient or something in this cavern that they need to take this NPC to so that he can help them. He's not much of a fighter, but he's good at hiding, he knows a couple of spells, and he also maybe will bring some healing potions to help the group out. See, now you've made him useful, even though he's not exactly the most deadly fighter. Or they could even be with a combat-focused escort, somebody that is a deadly fighter, and they say, oh, you want to know where that group of criminals are? Well, I'll take you to them as long as along the way I can get some of my vengeance on them. And then you have to help him fight a particular member of this gang or whatever, while you're also doing what's important to your story as the player. When done sparingly, when done right, and when done with the player's own initiative and choice and not just dumped on them, an escort can really add a lot of layers to combat and to the overall story as a whole. It gives you as a DM a lot of opportunities to flesh out the world, add some characters and ensemble to your story, and so on. Second thing we've got is very simply capture, not kill. This is pretty self-explanatory. The players have a target, but for whatever reason, they're going to be more motivated to capture and bring that enemy somewhere rather than outright kill them. So now their objective isn't to murder, their objective is to capture, and the consequence is that if this person dies, it's not that we'll die, it's that we won't get whatever information or money or whatever it is that we want if we're able to keep them alive. Perhaps the sheriff of the town that the players are in tells them that if you capture this bandit chief, I will give you 1,000 gold. If you bring him back dead, I will give you 200. But I want him alive so I can hang him publicly. Now the players are obviously going to be motivated by that large sum of money to attempt to capture him rather than kill him. Now this could honestly lead to some very interesting things. Not only will the combat encounter not be focused on murder, but even after the combat encounter, now you have this interesting problem of sort of an anti-escort to sort of bounce off the first example. Now you're bringing somebody along in the group that doesn't want to be there, and now you could have a whole session or two of dealing with how do we get this criminal back to the town alive. He could kill himself along the way. He could have a backup plan where some of his crew comes to help him out. Maybe we'll accidentally develop an emotional bond with him, and then once we get there, we won't want to see him hang for 1,000 gold. A lot of interesting stuff that can happen when you don't just outright kill the enemy, you capture them. Third one is one of my favorites. It's what I call the old in and out. That is not a technical term at all, but basically what I'm saying here is the players know that wherever they're going, they are not equipped to fight everything there, but there is some sort of objective they want. There is an NPC that they want to rescue. There is an item that they want to retrieve. There's information that they need to get. Or even, there's one person that they need to kill and then get out. Examples here might be there is a fortress and one of our friends is there. He was doing some recon, getting some information, and then he got captured. So we need to go rescue our friend, and then he'll be able to provide us with the information that is going to help us defeat the enemy. Only problem is there's about 200 guards in that fortress, and we're level 5. So there is no way that we're going to take all of them. So this is an in and out. The players now don't just need to worry about murdering everything, they need to pick their murders. Maybe not murder anyone. They need to figure out some sort of creative solution where they are going to be planting their resources resourcefully, there's a better way to say that, and trying not to get murdered themselves while completing this objective. And they know that at the end of the day, whether they get caught or not, their main goal here is to get in, get what they want, and get out as fast as possible. So you can see with this example, your consequence is still going to be death, but your player's objective is a lot different. They might be outright avoiding combat encounters if you do it this way. Number 4 on my quick little list is to stop the Hoard. This is an encounter in which there is essentially an infinitely respawning amount of enemies, or just way too many enemies, usually some sort of Hoard monster, low CR, that come in a bunch of groups and have Hoard tactics of some sort. These could be zombies, or skeletons, or other undead, orcs, goblins, you get it. And there is some sort of puzzle or task that the players need to solve to stop the Hoard from coming. This could involve getting to a location and shutting the door. This could involve waiting for help to arrive and doing something to signal them. This could involve figuring out a way to deter the Hoard from approaching. Again, right here you have an objective for the players that is not kill the things. Their objective is actually sort of a miniature puzzle or problem-solving thing that they have to do in the midst of dealing with this combat encounter. The combat encounter will not start out deadly, but they know that if this keeps going on, there is no way that they're going to be able to fight off everything that is coming. There's a really fun example of this that Focus. Yeah, there's a really fun example. I heard about this online. I did not come up with it myself, in which the party was living in some sort of encampment, and there were generators, they were magic, but they were like generators that were powering the camp, essentially, and they shut down. And as long as they were shut down, these horde of undead were going to keep coming and coming and never stop. It was essentially like a zombie survival thing. So their objective was to go out and turn on all of the generators. So they had to go out into this horde of undead. They had to figure out what was wrong with the generators. Then they had to come up with a plan to get them all back up and running, and then they had to get out of there. And they had to do all of that while dealing with this horde of undead, but knowing that they can't fight all of them, and then getting out without getting destroyed. You'll notice with both example 3 and this one that you need to establish to the players clearly that they cannot win this fight. You see, the assumption a lot of the times when you go into a D&D game is the standard. Go into the room, murder the things before they murder you. Yay, you did it. And as I've said several times already, that is totally fine, because that is the crux of this game. But when you do things that you want to spice up like this, you need to make it clear in some sort of way. You need to have an NPC tell them how well guarded this is. You need to make it clear that this horde is just unending. You need to do something so the players don't accidentally think in their heads, okay, this is some sort of challenge, we just need to figure it out, a way to kill all of them. Or maybe they'll think to themselves, well, we just need to fight here, and then our dungeon master is going to do some sort of cool cinematic thing and rescue us. Make sure that it is clear to the players that their objective is not to fight these things directly, that they have other objectives. If those other objectives aren't clear, you're kind of looking at a disaster. And last on my list, number 5, is just a battle of morals. This is essentially a fancy term that I came up with, don't thank me. Basically, it's just when the players don't necessarily want to kill the person, they just want to morally sway them. So they could have some sort of prior attachment. Maybe this enemy that they're fighting is actually family of one of the players, or they used to be an ally that is now seeing things differently than they are and has joined the evil side of the conflict. And the players don't want to just murder them because of this emotional bond that you've spent several sessions creating before it got to this point. So perhaps in this case, the players want to, similar to number 2, the capture not kill, they just want to incapacitate this person and then tell them that next time they'll have to kill them and then let them go. Or maybe they want to, before fighting, approach with some sort of information that maybe will keep them from wanting to retaliate, or anything along those lines. Now this one's a little wishy-washy because obviously there's still a chance that this will end in the normal murder versus murder, or that this will end up not being a combat encounter at all. But I think adding this sort of moral grayness to a combat encounter will already get your players thinking of a lot of different ways to approach the situation. If they care about the person they're going to go kill, odds are they're going to try to find a way not to kill them. So that's what I got. Escort, capture not kill, in and out, Hoard breaking, and battle of morals. Those are just 5 quick ideas to sort of set up different expectations and objectives and consequences for your combat encounters, so that when you do eventually get to those combat encounters that are as simple as murder before you get murdered, you've had an interesting journey along the way, and this isn't just one in a long string of very basic run-of-the-mill kill, travel, kill, travel, kill, travel. You've had this interesting array of encounters. Your players have felt weak in certain situations, and in other situations they have maybe felt too strong for their own good. And by the time you get to these big landmark fights in your campaign, your players have now had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of different journeys, and they're itching to just have a clean murder versus murder fight and not worry about all this other stuff. It was fun when they were doing it, but now they feel like they've earned the right to just go to the boss's lair and kill him. That's what I got this time. If you liked it, I have one other video. It's about bandits. This is not, it's the brand. I don't have a brand.